Rylan had spent most of his life working with machines, metal, and old forgotten ships that drifted at the edge of space. He was a quiet mechanic who liked silence more than crowds. For him, repairing broken things felt like giving them a second chance. Because of this, he often visited old junk fields floating near abandoned trade routes, searching for parts that still had value. Most people avoided these places because they were messy and full of old hazards. But for him, they were peaceful and familiar. On that day, he guided his small repair ship through one such junk field. It was a huge cloud of old containers, cracked ship panels, rusted cargo pods, and scraps that had been left behind by travelers who had long forgotten about them. Rylan had visited this place many times before. He knew which sections might contain valuable wiring or old engines. But today, something felt different. As he moved deeper into the cloud, he noticed a faint light blinking in the distance. It was weak and irregular, almost like someone tapping out a message with the last bit of energy left. He slowed his ship and turned toward the light. At first, he thought it was simply a leftover signal from a broken device. But when he got closer, he heard a soft sound through his scanner. It was not the sound of metal or machinery. It was a small, shaky chirp. It sounded alive. Rylan frowned and leaned closer to the screen. Living things almost never wandered into junk fields because they were dangerous and full of sharp debris. Curious and concerned, he maneuvered his ship around a cluster of floating crates and finally spotted the source. A damaged alien cargo pod was wedged between two old hull fragments. One side of the pod had cracked open, and pieces of strange glowing material floated around it like dust. The weak chirp came again. Rylan felt a knot form in his stomach. He couldn't tell what was inside, but he knew it wasn't a machine. He activated his ship's exterior lights, shining them directly onto the pod. The light revealed something curled up inside the broken container. It was small, about the size of a medium animal, with soft fur and long ears that drooped across its body. But its fur was covered with dark, shell-like organisms clinging to it. The creatures looked like living barnacles, each one pulsing faintly, as if feeding on the body beneath them. The sight made Rylan's heart tighten. The little creature inside the pod was shaking. Each breath it took seemed harder than the last. "Who left you out here?" he whispered, even though the creature could not hear him through the glass. He hesitated. Helping unknown alien organisms was risky. Some parasites could jump hosts. Some could emit toxins. Some creatures reacted violently when touched. But then the creature inside sluggishly lifted its head. Its eyes glowed faintly, and it tried to move toward him, pressing its head weakly against the cracked panel, as if asking for help. The simple gesture hit Rylan with unexpected force. He had seen machines break, ships explode, and scrap fields swallow entire vessels. But this was different. This was life trying not to give up. He opened the exterior hatch of his ship and prepared to bring the pod inside. He took safety precautions, activating a containment shield around the pod before pulling it in. The damaged container landed gently inside the quarantine area of his ship. The small creature let out another weak chirp, this time softer, as if it understood, was no longer alone. Rylan approached the pod carefully. The barnacle-like parasites looked worse up close. They seemed to be gripping the creature's skin tightly, some embedded deeper than others. A few glowed faint blue, showing that they were draining energy from their helpless host. Rylan felt a mix of anger and sadness. Someone had sealed this creature inside the pod and simply thrown it into space to die. He didn't understand how anyone could do something like that. He gently pried open the cracked pod door. The creature inside flinched at the movement, but when it saw his face, it forced itself to stay still. Its eyes, though tired and dim, carried a quiet hope that almost broke him. "It's all right," he said softly, speaking as if to a frightened pet. "I won't hurt you." The creature blinked slowly, as if trying to trust him. Relan slipped his arms beneath it carefully. It was lighter than he expected, and he could feel its trembling through the barnacles. The parasites twitched as he lifted the creature, reacting to the sudden movement. He hurried and laid the creature on the soft surface of the quarantine bed. He kept his mask on and activated the air filters. Just in case the barnacles released anything harmful, the creature curled into a small shape again. Breathing in weak, uneven gasps, Raylan reached out and gently touched the space near its head, avoiding the parasites. "You're safe now," he whispered, hoping the creature sensed the calm in his voice. He took a step back and assessed the situation. The creature needed help fast. The parasites were draining it, and if he didn't act soon, the little being might not survive. But he also knew that removing alien organisms without understanding how they worked could be dangerous for both of them. Still, leaving it alone wasn't an option. Whoever abandoned this creature had planned for it to die slowly, in silence, in the cold of empty space. Rylan refused to let that be its fate. He grabbed his tools, scanners, and a small device he used for analyzing unknown tech. He began scanning the barnacle creatures one by one. The readings he got back surprised him. These weren't natural parasites. They were some kind of engineered organisms, grown to attach to a host and siphon energy until the host was too weak to move. They were cruel, efficient, and clearly used for punishment or disposal. That meant someone had placed them on purpose. Relan clenched his jaw. "Someone did this to you." The creature let out a soft sound, almost like a whimper. It lifted one of its long ears slightly, as if responding to his voice. Rylan felt something inside him shift. He was just a mechanic who lived quietly, far from politics and conflict. But in that moment, he knew he couldn't ignore what he had found. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small thermal blanket. He placed it gently over the creature, careful not to disturb the parasites. To his surprise, the creature relaxed at the touch of the blanket, curling its body slightly toward the warmth. "That's better," he murmured. "We'll figure this out." The junk field outside drifted silently as his ship floated among the forgotten debris. Inside, in the quiet quarantine room, a small abandoned life form rested under the watch of a human who had no idea how much this simple act would change both of their lives. Relan didn't know what species the creature belonged to. He didn't know why it had been abandoned or what dangers the parasites held. But he knew one thing with certainty: he would not leave it to die like the ones who had cast it away. He had saved broken machines his entire life. Saving one small living being felt far more important. The creature opened its eyes again. For a brief moment, there was something grateful in its gaze. Ryland felt the weight of the decision he had just made settle onto his shoulders. He didn't know what the coming hours would bring, but he knew he had chosen the right path. He stepped closer and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "I'll help you. I promise." The creature let out a tiny, tired chirp that almost sounded like relief. And in that moment, surrounded by metal, tools, and floating debris outside, the bond between them began quietly, without force or fear. A mechanic and a fragile alien life form, connected by an unexpected rescue in a forgotten corner of space. Ryland sat quietly in his small repair ship, staring at the creature curled under the thin thermal blanket. Its soft breathing was uneven, and the faint pulsing of the barnacle-like organisms covering its body reminded him of just how fragile it was. He knew he couldn't act carelessly. The parasites were not normal. They were bioengineered to feed on living beings, and he had no idea what would happen if he made a mistake. One wrong move, and the creature could die, or worse. The organisms could spread. He rubbed his face, trying to shake off the tension. He had dealt with dangerous machinery before, even unstable reactors that could blow at any moment. But this was different. This was life in its purest, most vulnerable form, and it depended entirely on him. He glanced at the small creature again. Its ears twitched slightly, as if it were listening to him, and its eyes opened just enough to show a faint glow. Those eyes seemed to look straight into him, silently asking for trust. Raylan took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help. He had to think clearly. He turned on his portable scanning device and began analyzing the barnacles. The readouts made his stomach twist. They were absorbing energy from the creature's nervous system, slowly draining it. If he didn't intervene, the small alien would weaken completely within hours. The data also showed that some of the barnacles were resistant to normal chemical treatments, meaning he couldn't simply remove them with a simple tool or solution. This was going to be tricky. He rolled up his sleeves and began planning. The first step was to make sure the creature stayed calm. Any sudden movement could make the barnacles react violently. He spoke softly, more to reassure himself than the creature. "It's okay. We'll take this one step at a time." He noticed the creature flick its tail slightly, a sign that it was listening, even if it didn't fully understand him. Rylan remembered something from his training long ago. When dealing with unknown biological systems, observation was key. He couldn't rush. He decided to spend the first few hours just watching, recording the barnacles' behavior, noting which ones pulsed faster, which ones seemed more aggressive, and which ones barely reacted. He marked the data in a small notebook and ran it through his scanner again and again. Each reading added a tiny piece to the puzzle, helping him understand how the creatures interacted with their host. After several hours, he finally felt confident enough to make a cautious move. He activated a small energy field generator, the kind he used to test ship circuits. The idea was to create a pulse that would temporarily weaken the barnacles without harming the creature. He adjusted the settings carefully, reducing the intensity slowly, and held the device over the creature's side. The barnacles twitched at first, their glow flickering, but the creature stayed still, trusting him. That trust, even though he didn't fully understand it, gave Rylan a surge of determination. He knew he couldn't fail. The pulse worked better than he expected. A few of the barnacles detached slightly, loosening their grip. Rylan quickly grabbed his small extraction tools and started removing them one by one, taking extreme care not to touch the creature's skin directly. Each removal made the creature let out a soft, low sound, like a sigh or a whimper. Rylan murmured soothing words as he worked. "Almost there. You're doing well. We'll get through this." Time passed slowly. The hours stretched into what felt like days. Rylan didn't eat, didn't sleep, and barely moved from his spot. He focused entirely on the creature, watching for any sudden signs of distress. Sweat ran down his forehead, and his hands ached from the precise movements, but he couldn't stop. Every barnacle removed was a small victory, a step closer to saving the life that had been abandoned so cruelly. As the sun, or rather, the distant star they were orbiting, shifted its position, the creature began to respond more visibly. It lifted its head higher, sniffing the air in curiosity. Its ears twitched more, and the glow in its eyes grew brighter. Rylan noticed it trying to move slightly, testing its limbs, and he felt a small surge of relief. The creature was stronger than he expected. Despite the trauma and exhaustion, it still had the will to survive. But just as he thought the worst was over, a sudden spasm from the barnacles startled him. A cluster embedded deeply in the creature's side reacted violently to the extraction process, pulsing faster and almost igniting the small chamber with energy. The creature yelped softly and flinched. Rylan froze for a moment, heart pounding. He adjusted the energy field, lowering the intensity, and gently pressed his hand near the creature's shoulder without touching the barnacles directly. Slowly, the cluster calmed, and the creature settled again, trusting him once more. That moment reminded Rylan how fragile trust could be. The creature had already been betrayed by whoever abandoned it, and here it was, giving itself to a stranger, risking everything on a human who could have easily turned away. He felt a quiet weight in his chest. "I won't let you down," he whispered, and meant it more than anything he had said in his life. Over the next few hours, he worked with extreme caution, removing more of the parasites while monitoring the creature's vital signs. Each removed barnacle was studied and stored in a small containment chamber. Rylan wanted to understand what they were, how they worked, and whether they could spread if he was careless. His mind, usually focused on metal and circuits, now dealt with living biology. But his approach was the same: observe, analyze. Act carefully. As the day turned into night, the creature finally relaxed enough to stretch its limbs a little. Rylan watched in awe. Its movement was tentative, almost awkward, but it was movement nonetheless. Its fur, though still partially covered with barnacle remnants, looked softer now, and its breathing steadied. He could see a spark of life returning to its eyes, a spark that had been nearly extinguished when he found it. Rylan realized he needed to find a name for the creature. It deserved more than the alien. Something simple, something he could say without fear or hesitation. He leaned close and looked into its glowing eyes. "Lutri," he said softly, testing the sound. The creature twitched its ears, the faintest sign of acknowledgement. From that moment, the name stuck. Lutri. Even as Lutri began to regain strength, Rylan knew the work was far from over. The barnacles had left marks on its body, deep enough that some energy scarring remained. It would take time, patience, and careful monitoring to ensure they didn't return or cause permanent harm. But for now, the creature was alive, breathing, and slowly beginning to trust him. Rylan sat back for the first time since the rescue, allowing himself to breathe. He thought about how fragile life could be and how easily it could be discarded. Lutri had been abandoned in a cold, empty junk field, left to die with millions of tiny parasites feeding on it. And yet, here it was, still fighting, still alive, still willing to trust a stranger. He reached out and placed a hand gently on Lutri's side, careful to avoid the remaining barnacles. The creature leaned into the touch slightly, almost like it was thanking him. Rylan smiled faintly. "We'll take it slow," he said. "Step by step, you'll be okay." The quiet ship seemed to hold its breath around them. Outside, the debris drifted silently, indifferent to the small miracle happening inside. Rylan knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would be difficult. The barnacles were not the only challenge. Lutri had been abandoned for a reason. There were mysteries behind the creature's creation and the clan that had discarded it. And perhaps there were dangers still lurking in space, waiting for an opportunity to strike. But for now, Rylan focused on the present. He focused on life, fragile and stubborn, and the bond forming between a human mechanic and an alien creature. Lutri's quiet trust, earned in the simplest moments, was more precious than anything Rylan had ever worked on. And in that silence, with tools and scanners scattered around, he realized something important. Saving something that had been cast aside didn't just change the life of the creature, it changed him too. And so, he kept working, kept watching, and kept speaking softly to the creature that had chosen to trust him. One careful step at a time, Rylan and Lutri began a journey neither of them could have predicted. A journey born of compassion, patience, and the simple choice to not turn away when someone needed help most. Rylan spent the first hours after Lutri's rescue studying the barnacle-like parasites and the small creature itself. He knew he couldn't rush. Every movement mattered. Every decision could mean the difference between life and death. The barnacles were strange, alive yet mechanical in some ways, and they reacted quickly to anything they sensed as a threat. Removing them too fast could hurt Lutri. Doing nothing could let them drain the creature completely. It was a delicate balance. He set up his workspace with tools, lights, and containment fields. The small bed where Lutri rested was padded, and a low hum from the energy shield surrounded the quarantine chamber. He watched the creature move slightly, testing its limbs, blinking slowly, and occasionally sniffing the air. Even in its weakened state, Lutri showed signs of intelligence and awareness. Rylan was struck again by the determination in its eyes. This little being had survived days of isolation, with countless parasites draining its strength, and it had not given up. Rylan activated a soft, low-frequency scanner that pulsed around the barnacles. He wanted to measure their energy patterns before attempting removal. Each barnacle responded differently. Some glowed steadily, while others flickered and throbbed as though sensing his intentions. He noticed one particularly large cluster near Lutri's shoulder, reacting violently whenever he moved his tools too close. He paused. The creature flinched slightly, eyes widening. Rylan realized this cluster might be connected more deeply to Lutri's nervous system than the others. Removing it incorrectly could harm the creature or trigger a defensive reaction from the barnacles. He took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. "One at a time," he whispered. "Just one at a time." He adjusted the energy pulse device to a weaker frequency. The goal was not to force the barnacles off, but to weaken their grip enough that he could safely extract them. He activated it gently over the first few clusters. They shivered, twitching but not violently. Lutri let out a small sound, low and almost like a groan, but it stayed still. Careful and patient, Rylan picked up his extraction tools. He began with the barnacles that were easiest to remove, those that had only shallow roots. One by one, he detached them and placed them in a small containment unit. Lutri watched each movement, blinking and occasionally letting out soft, quiet sounds. Rylan felt a connection growing between them. He was no longer just a rescuer. He was a partner in survival, a protector. Lutri had no other choice but to trust him, and it had Dot as the hours passed. Rylan faced more difficult clusters. Some of the barnacles were embedded deeper, almost fused to Lutri's skin. Every touch caused a ripple of energy through the creature, and he had to adjust his tools and energy field carefully to avoid harming it. Sweat ran down his face. His hands ached from holding the instruments steady for so long, but he refused to stop. He couldn't. Lutri's life depended on him, and there was no one else who would help Dot at one point. A particularly stubborn cluster reacted violently. It pulsed sharply, sending a small shock through the quarantine chamber. Lutri yelped and tried to pull away, its small body trembling. Rylan froze for a moment, his heart racing. He lowered the energy field slightly and held his hand near Lutri without touching the parasites. Slowly, the cluster calmed, and Lutri's breathing returned to normal. That moment reminded him how fragile trust could be. This creature had been betrayed before, abandoned by beings who were supposed to care for it. Yet here it was, letting him continue, giving itself completely to a human it barely knew. "I won't hurt you," Rylan whispered, more to himself than to Lutri. "I promise." He adjusted the pulse frequency again and tried a gentler approach. This time, the barnacle loosened just enough to slide off without triggering a violent reaction. Rylan exhaled slowly, relief flooding through him. One step closer, time became almost meaningless as he continued his work. He didn't notice the hours passing, only the delicate movements of the barnacles and the small sounds Lutri made. Occasionally, the creature would twitch its ears, or its tail would flick slightly, but it remained still for the most part. Rylan realized that these subtle movements were signs of its will to survive. Every small twitch meant it was still fighting, still alive, and still trusting him. Dot, as the extraction continued, Ryland began to notice something remarkable. Lutri seemed to respond to him beyond simple trust. When he spoke softly, the creature's breathing slowed. When he paused and watched, it stayed calmer. It was as if Lutri understood his intentions, reading his body language and tone. Ryland felt a warmth in his chest. This was more than a rescue. This was communication, connection, and understanding between two very different beings. He paused for a moment and studied Lutri. Its fur was patchy now, the barnacles removed from most areas, but some stubborn clusters remained near its back and shoulders. Despite the scars and fatigue, the creature's eyes shone brighter than before. There was life returning, a quiet strength that surprised him. Ryland realized that survival was not just about removing the parasites. It was about patience, care, and respect. Lutri wasn't just a victim. It was resilient, determined, and capable of bonding. Ryland adjusted his energy pulse device one last time. He focused on the remaining barnacles, the ones that had resisted removal all day. He knew this would be the most delicate part. Any mistake could cause harm. He positioned the device carefully, gradually weakening the barnacles while keeping Lutri calm with his voice and gentle presence. The final clusters pulsed violently for a moment, but then slowly loosened. Ryland used his tools with precision, removing them one by one. When the last barnacle came off, it was like a weight had lifted from the small creature. Lutri let out a soft, shaky sound and curled into a relaxed posture, closing its eyes. Ryland leaned back and exhaled, exhaustion hitting him all at once. His hands trembled, his muscles ached, and his mind felt drained. But he felt something deeper than relief. He felt pride. He had not only saved a life, but he had earned the trust of a being that had every reason to distrust the universe. Lutri was alive, breathing steadily, and slowly beginning to move its limbs without fear. Over the next hour, Ryland observed Lutri as it explored its small quarantine space cautiously. It sniffed the air, stretched its legs, and twitched its tail. It seemed curious, cautious, but unafraid. Ryland realized that he had done more than remove the parasites. He had created a safe environment where Lutri could begin to heal emotionally as well as physically. As he watched, he began to notice subtle patterns in Lutri's behavior. It seemed to respond to his presence, following him with its eyes when he moved. It occasionally made small, soft sounds that felt almost like attempts at communication. Ryland smiled faintly. This was more than survival. It was the beginning of understanding, of a bond that neither of them had expected. He decided to give the creature a small meal. Using nutrient gel he carried for emergencies, he placed a little near Lutri. The creature sniffed it cautiously, then began to eat slowly. Watching it eat, Ryland felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Life had returned to this small being. The barnacles were gone, and Lutri was beginning to regain strength. Ryland also realized he needed to monitor Lutri continuously. The barnacles had left marks that might cause long-term problems if neglected. He set up small sensors to track vital signs, keeping an eye on energy levels, pulse, and reactions. He didn't leave its side, speaking softly, adjusting equipment, and observing every subtle change. Lutri seemed to recognize his care, leaning slightly toward him at times, blinking in a way that suggested acknowledgement. By the end of the day, Lutri had regained a remarkable amount of strength. It moved more confidently, exploring the corners of the quarantine chamber, stretching and testing its limbs. Ryland felt an unexpected warmth in his chest. He had rescued many things in his life-broken ships, damaged machines, lost tools, but nothing had ever given him this feeling. Lutri's quiet trust, its willingness to survive, and the connection that had grown between them were far more powerful than any mechanical repair. As the ship drifted silently through the junk field, Ryland realized something important. He had not just saved a creature. He had proven to himself that life, no matter how small or abandoned, could be protected and nurtured. Lutri's survival was a reminder of resilience, trust, and the quiet strength that could exist even in the most vulnerable beings. And as he watched the small alien creature curl up near the soft pads of the quarantine bed, he knew this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead: Lutri's full recovery, understanding its past, and discovering the reasons it had been abandoned. But for now, he allowed himself to feel relief, gratitude, and the quiet joy of saving a life that had almost been lost in the cold emptiness of space. Ryland sat back in his chair and looked at Lutri as the small creature moved around the quarantine chamber, cautiously sniffing and exploring every corner. For the first time since he had found it, Lutri seemed almost calm. Its breathing was steady, its eyes no longer dull with weakness, and the barnacle-like parasites that had once drained its life were gone. But Ryland knew the story was far from over. The creatures had been engineered, and someone had abandoned Lutri for a reason. There had to be more to its past, and he wanted to understand it. He activated a small device he had been developing for detecting bioluminal signals. It was mostly a research tool, something he had been using to study exotic energy readings from rare materials in the junk field. But he had a feeling it might help him understand Lutri. When he brought the device near the creature, he noticed faint pulses from its fur and skin. These pulses weren't random. They seemed to carry images, emotions, and memories. Almost like a language, the creature was trying to communicate. Raylan adjusted the settings carefully, not wanting to disturb Lutri. As the device recorded, tiny flashes of images appeared on the screen. At first, they were unclear, a blur of light and shapes, but slowly, coherent patterns began to emerge. Lutri had been part of a group, a clan of travelers who moved between stars. The images showed graceful creatures, similar to Lutri but larger, moving through vast spaceships, exploring planets, and interacting with strange alien technology. Lutri had been among them, not alone, but part of a family. Then the images shifted, showing something darker. Lutri was restrained, surrounded by strange devices, and the barnacle-like organisms were being attached to its body. The scenes were brief, almost like glimpses, but clear enough for Ryland to understand. Lutri had resisted something, some experiment, and for that it had been abandoned. The clan that had once been its family had discarded it as if it were disposable, leaving it to drift alone in space with the parasites feeding on it. Raylan's chest tightened. He had seen cruelty before, in conflicts over scrap fields and trade routes, but this felt personal. Someone had betrayed Lutri in the worst possible way, leaving it alone to suffer. He reached out and gently placed a hand near the creature. Lutri froze for a moment, ears twitching, then looked at him, eyes wide. Ryland whispered, "I'm not going to let that happen again. You're safe now." The creature blinked slowly, almost as if it understood. The connection between them had grown deeper, beyond just trust. Ryland realized that Lutri was not only intelligent, but capable of memory, emotion, and perhaps even understanding human intentions. The barnacles had not broken its spirit. If anything, they had made it more cautious, more aware, more willing to survive. Over the next few hours, Ryland focused on helping Lutri regain more physical strength. He provided nutrient gels, warmed blankets, and soft surfaces for resting. He also spent time observing the creature, noticing patterns in its behavior. Lutri would stretch, curl, and test its limbs, slowly regaining mobility. It began to make soft, melodic sounds, almost like attempts at communication. Ryland responded gently, mimicking the tones, speaking softly. And the creature would react, tilting its head or flicking its tail. While tending to Lutri, Ryland began to wonder about the clan that had abandoned it. Who were they? Why had they created these barnacle-like parasites? What purpose had Lutri served before being discarded? These questions lingered in his mind, but for now, he pushed them aside. The immediate concern was helping Lutri heal and feel safe. As the day passed, Lutri became more active. It began exploring its surroundings with confidence, walking across the padded floor, sniffing instruments, and occasionally watching Rylan work. Its curiosity was remarkable. Even after everything it had endured, Lutri still wanted to learn, still wanted to interact. Rylan smiled faintly. There was resilience in this small creature that reminded him of why he had become a mechanic in the first place, to fix what others had given up on, to restore life where it had been discarded. Rylan decided to test the bioluminal communication again. He gently brought the device closer, careful not to alarm Lutri. This time, the images were more detailed. He saw Lutri moving through vast halls of alien ships, playing among other creatures, and interacting with beings that seemed to be elders or leaders of the clan. There were signs of teaching, learning, and companionship. Lutri had a past filled with experiences and relationships, all erased when it had been abandoned. The images then showed Lutri resisting some form of experiment. Its body was restrained, and it was struggling against the devices being used on it. The barnacle-like organisms were attached to it during this time, likely as a method of control or punishment. Rylan felt a sharp pang of anger. How could a being capable of such loyalty and intelligence be treated like this? He reached out and placed a hand near Lutri again. The creature looked at him, eyes wide, and Rylan whispered softly, "You're free now. No one will ever do that to you again." Lutri responded with a soft sound, almost like a sigh of relief. It pressed its head slightly toward Rylan's hand, as if acknowledging the promise. In that moment, Rylan felt a bond unlike any he had ever experienced. This was more than trust. This was connection, understanding, and perhaps even gratitude. The creature had survived unimaginable pain and still chose to bond with a stranger who had shown care and patience. As hours turned into evening, Rylan continued to study Lutri. He noticed that the creature had unique abilities. Its fur and skin could emit faint light, patterns that seemed to reflect emotion or intention. Sometimes, when he spoke, the patterns shifted, almost as if Lutri was trying to communicate in a language of light. Rylan marveled at this. It was as though Lutri had a secret code, a way of expressing feelings without words, shaped by its past experiences. Rylan realized that understanding Lutri would take time. He couldn't rush it. The creature had been betrayed, left alone to die, and had survived through sheer willpower. It would need patience, care, and gentle encouragement to fully recover. And yet, despite everything, Lutri showed remarkable resilience. It explored, observed, and responded to him, slowly learning that not all beings were cruel. He spent the rest of the night quietly observing Lutri, the creature curled up near the soft pads he had provided, eyes half closed but alert. Its breathing was steady, and the faint glow from its fur pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Rylan felt a quiet satisfaction. He had uncovered part of Lutri's past, understood the betrayal it had suffered, and begun the slow process of helping it heal. He also realized that their journey was only beginning. There were still questions. Why had the clan abandoned Lutri? Who had created the Barnacles? And what dangers might still exist in space that could threaten the creature? But for now, he allowed himself to focus on the present. Lutri was alive, recovering, and slowly learning to trust again. That was enough. As the ship floated silently among the abandoned debris of the junk field, Rylan and Lutri shared a quiet companionship. He spoke softly, explaining the tools, the ship, and the simple routines they would follow. Lutri listened, tilted its head, and responded with soft sounds, its glow shifting in subtle patterns. It was clear that a bond was forming, built on trust, care, and the shared experience of survival. Rylan reflected on the day's discoveries. He had learned about Lutri's past, its resilience, and its intelligence. He had seen firsthand the cruelty it had endured, and witnessed the quiet strength that had kept it alive. And most importantly, he realized that life, no matter how small or abandoned, deserved protection, care, and respect. Lutri was living proof of that principle. As he finally leaned back in his chair, exhausted but satisfied, he whispered one last thought to the creature. "We'll take this one step at a time. Together, we'll figure it all out." Lutri's ears twitched slightly, its eyes glowing faintly, and it nudged toward him. A small but unmistakable gesture of trust. And in the quiet of the ship, surrounded by the drifting debris of forgotten worlds, Rylan understood something profound. Saving Lutri had not only given the creature a second chance, it had changed him as well. He had discovered patience, empathy, and the power of connection in the most unlikely place. With the most unlikely companion, the night stretched on, and the stars outside shone coldly, distant and indifferent. But inside the small ship, a quiet warmth persisted. Two lives, human and alien, had collided in a forgotten junk field and formed a bond that neither abandonment nor cruelty could break. And as they rested, each learning to trust and understand the other, Rylan knew that the path ahead, while uncertain, held promise, because Lutri was no longer alone, and he would never let it be. Rylan had spent the last few days focused entirely on Lutri. The small alien creature was beginning to move more confidently, and its breathing had become steady. It stretched its limbs, walked short distances across the padded floor, and even began exploring parts of the ship that had once seemed intimidating. But there was one challenge left completely neutralizing: the remaining traces of the barnacle-like organisms that still clung to its body. Some clusters were deeply embedded, and if not treated carefully, they could still drain Lutri's energy or cause lasting damage. Rylan prepared for the task with meticulous care. He arranged his tools, double-checked the energy pulse device, and created a soft containment field around the work area. Lutri watched him closely, ears twitching, eyes glowing faintly. Despite its curiosity, the creature remained cautious. Rylan understood why. The barnacles had caused it pain, had threatened its life, and had come from beings it had once trusted. The experience had made it wary. He spoke softly to Lutri, trying to calm it. "We'll take it slow. I'll be careful. Just stay with me, okay?" Lutri blinked slowly, tilting its head, and shifted closer to the padded area. It was a small gesture, but to Rylan, it meant that the creature was willing to let him continue, that it still trusted him despite the trauma it had endured. The first cluster he targeted was the one that had reacted violently during previous attempts. Rylan activated the energy pulse device at a very low intensity, watching the readings on his scanner. The barnacle twitched and pulsed, but it no longer sparked violently. He worked slowly, carefully inserting his extraction tools to separate the organism from Lutri's skin. Each movement had to be precise. Any mistake could injure the creature or trigger a defensive reaction. As he worked, Lutri let out a soft, almost musical sound. It was not a cry of pain, but more like a sigh or an acknowledgement. Rylan felt a small wave of relief. The creature was responding to him, staying calm, and giving him the chance to finish what he had started. He continued with painstaking care, removing each stubborn barnacle one by one, placing them in containment to prevent any spread or contamination. Hours passed. The task was exhausting. Rylan's hands ached from holding the delicate instruments, and his mind was constantly focused on Lutri's responses. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he refused to stop. He couldn't. Lutri's life depended on his focus and precision. He had come too far to fail now. As he worked, Rylan noticed something remarkable. The barnacles seemed to respond not just to the energy pulses, but to his presence and calm voice. When he spoke softly, they pulsed less aggressively. When he paused and watched, they twitched, but did not lash out. It was as if they recognized his intention to help, not harm. This observation allowed him to adjust his approach, making the remaining extraction safer and more controlled. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last stubborn cluster was removed. Rylan exhaled slowly, his body trembling from exhaustion. Lutri collapsed onto the soft pads, breathing heavily at first, then gradually slowing. The barnacles, once threatening and powerful, now lay inert in the containment chamber. The creature was free. Raylan reached out cautiously, letting his hand hover near Lutri. The creature lifted its head slightly, blinking at him with wide, luminous eyes. Slowly, it stretched, testing its limbs, and then moved closer to Ryland's hand, nudging against it gently. That small gesture filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He had earned its trust completely. Over the next few hours, Ryland focused on helping Lutri recover physically. He provided nutrient gels and warmed the blankets, encouraging the creature to eat, rest, and regain energy. Lutri was cautious at first, but gradually it began to eat more confidently, drink small amounts of water, and explore the ship with a growing sense of security. Raylan also spent time observing Lutri's behavior and subtle signs of intelligence. The creature began to respond to his voice more deliberately, following him when he moved from one part of the ship to another. It would tilt its head or flick its tail when he spoke, and occasionally it would emit soft musical sounds. Rylan realized that Lutri was attempting to communicate. The barnacles had not broken its mind or spirit. They had only tested its patience and will to survive. He marveled at Lutri's resilience. Despite being abandoned, left to die, and subjected to bioengineered parasites, it had survived. It had retained its intelligence, curiosity, and capacity to trust. That realization filled him with awe. In all his years as a mechanic, he had repaired countless machines, but nothing had ever demonstrated the quiet determination and strength that Lutri now displayed. Ryland decided to create a small training area for Lutri, using soft mats, gentle ramps, and safe spaces. He encouraged the creature to move, jump, and stretch. At first, Lutri was hesitant, stepping lightly and testing its balance. But with patience and gentle encouragement, it began to explore more confidently. It would leap small distances, land carefully, and then look at Rylan as if to ask for approval. Each successful movement was a victory, a reminder of the creature's growing strength. As the day passed, Rylan noticed that Lutri began to display behaviors that suggested intelligence beyond instinct. It would observe him working on ship repairs, following his hands and tools with keen interest. At times, it seemed to understand the purpose of what he was doing, or at least showed curiosity about it. Rylan smiled faintly. Lutri was not just recovering, it was learning, adapting, and engaging with its environment. By the evening, Lutri was moving with remarkable confidence. It stretched, explored, and even played gently with small objects Rylan placed in the padded area. The creature's soft musical sounds seemed joyful now, not cautious or fearful. Rylan felt a quiet satisfaction. He had not only saved a life, but had helped it regain strength, confidence, and a sense of safety. Raylan also reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Lutri had been abandoned, betrayed by its own clan, and left to survive against impossible odds. And yet, it had endured. Its resilience was a lesson he would never forget. In many ways, helping Lutri had changed him too. He had learned patience, empathy, and the value of trust. He realized that life, no matter how small or seemingly fragile, was worth protecting. As night fell outside the ship, Lutri curled up near the padded area, eyes half closed but alert. Its breathing was steady, and its fur emitted a soft, rhythmic glow. Rylan watched for a long while, marveling at the creature's recovery and quiet strength. He whispered softly, "You're safe now. Nothing will hurt you again." Lutri responded with a gentle sound, pressing its head slightly toward his hand in acknowledgement. The quiet bond between them had deepened. Rylan realized that this was no longer just a rescue. Lutri had become a companion, a partner, and perhaps even a friend. The trust they had built together was fragile but strong, born from shared survival, care, and understanding. Raylan knew there were still challenges ahead. Lutri's past was complex, and the clan that had abandoned it might still exist somewhere in the galaxy. But for now, they had this moment. They had safety, trust, and the first steps toward a life together. That was enough to keep moving forward, Dot, as the ship drifted silently through the junk field. Raylan and Lutri rested. The small creature's soft glow illuminated the padded area, casting gentle light on the tools, instruments, and floating debris outside. Inside the ship, life and hope had returned. Lutri had survived the Barnacles, regained strength, and begun to trust again. And Rylan had witnessed a small miracle, one that reminded him why he continued to care for what others had discarded. The night stretched on, and the stars outside shone distant and cold, indifferent to the lives within the ship. But inside there was warmth, life, and a quiet connection that neither abandonment nor cruelty could break. Rylan knew the journey ahead would be long, with challenges and mysteries yet to face. But he also knew one thing with certainty. Lutri was alive, and he would never let it be alone again. And as he finally leaned back in his chair, exhausted but content, Rylan whispered, "We'll face everything together. Step by step, we'll make it through." Lutri's ears twitched slightly, and its soft, glowing eyes met his. That simple exchange, filled with trust and understanding, marked the start of a bond that would endure, no matter what the galaxy had in store. Rylan woke early, the soft hum of the ship's engines filling the small cabin. Lutri had already stirred, moving carefully across the padded floor. Its movements were now confident, precise, and deliberate. The creature stretched its limbs fully, testing its balance, then lifted its head to look at Rylan, ears twitching in recognition. There was no fear in its eyes, only awareness and curiosity. Rylan smiled faintly. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Lutri was recovering fully, and the bond they had built was stronger than ever. He moved to prepare the day, gathering nutrient gels, fresh water, and some small training objects. Lutri followed him closely, observing each movement with quiet intelligence. The creature had begun to anticipate his actions, tilting its head when he reached for certain tools, stepping closer when he offered food, and occasionally emitting soft, musical sounds. Rylan realized that Lutri was not only communicating, but also understanding routines. The creature was learning, adapting, and showing the depth of its intelligence. After breakfast, Rylan guided Lutri to the training area he had set up. It was a simple space, padded for safety, with gentle ramps and obstacles that encouraged movement. At first, Lutri circled the area slowly, sniffing and testing the surfaces. Then, gradually, it began to leap short distances, land lightly, and explore higher platforms. Each successful jump was followed by a small sound, almost like laughter or delight. Rylan couldn't help but smile. Despite the trauma Lutri had suffered, it was experiencing joy for the first time in what must have been a long while. He decided to introduce some mental challenges as well. Using small objects of different shapes and textures, he encouraged Lutri to investigate, touch, and manipulate them. The creature approached cautiously at first, sniffing and tapping each object with its paws. Then, as it grew more comfortable, it began to interact with them more confidently, nudging, pushing, and even moving some from one place to another. Rylan watched in awe. The Barnacles had been gone for days now, Yet Lutri's spirit had fully returned. Its intelligence, curiosity, and resilience were remarkable. As the hours passed, Rylan noticed subtle patterns in Lutri's behavior. The creature had begun to anticipate his actions, responding before he even spoke. When he reached for food, it would move closer. When he picked up a tool, it would watch intently. It was almost as if Lutri understood not only what he was doing, but why. Rylan felt a deep sense of connection, realizing that the trust and care he had shown were being returned in ways he had not expected. By midday, Rylan decided it was time to test Lutri's mobility outside the quarantine area. He carefully guided the creature through a small corridor, ensuring there were no sharp edges or hazards. Lutri moved with surprising confidence, ears alert, tail flicking, and eyes bright. Occasionally, it would pause to sniff the air or tilt its head, seemingly analyzing its surroundings. Rylan felt pride swelling in his chest. The creature that had once been abandoned, left to die, and drained by barnacle-like organisms, was now moving freely. Strong and aware. After the initial walk, Rylan encouraged Lutri to explore more freely. The creature bounded across the padded floor, leaping over obstacles and investigating corners of the ship. Its movements were fluid and energetic, a clear sign that its body had healed and its confidence had grown. Rylan followed, offering soft encouragement and speaking gently. "Good job," he said. "That's it. You're doing great." Lutri responded with a small sound, almost musical, and twitched its ears toward him. Rylan then spent time observing Lutri's unique abilities. Its fur could emit subtle patterns of light, pulsing in response to mood, curiosity, or interaction. The glow shifted when it explored, changed when it communicated, and dimmed when it rested. Rylan marveled at the beauty and intelligence reflected in these patterns. It was a silent form of expression, one that he could slowly begin to understand through patience and observation. As evening approached, Rylan decided to introduce a simple exercise in trust. He placed a soft blanket on the floor and encouraged Lutri to lie down. At first, the creature was hesitant, stretching its limbs cautiously. Then, gradually, it relaxed completely, eyes half closed, ears flicking lightly. Rylan sat nearby, speaking softly, and watched as Lutri exhaled a steady, relaxed breath. This was a milestone. The creature that had once flinched at every sound, that had trembled in fear, was now calm and confident in his presence. Rylan reflected on how far Lutri had come. The barnacle-like parasites, once a threat to its life, were gone. Its strength, intelligence, and spirit had returned fully. And more than that, a bond had formed between them that went beyond survival. Lutri trusted him completely, and Rylan had come to care deeply for the creature. He realized that saving it had not only restored its life, but had changed his own understanding of trust, compassion, and connection. Over the next few days, Rylan continued to support Lutri's recovery. He introduced small tasks, gentle challenges, and opportunities for exploration. Each day, Lutri grew more confident, playful, and curious. It would watch Rylan work on ship repairs, mimic small actions, and respond to his voice with increasing awareness. The creature had become a companion in the truest sense, intelligent, responsive, and emotionally attuned. Rylan also began documenting Lutri's behavior, noting its responses, patterns, and subtle communication cues. He realized that the creature's experiences, its past, and its resilience were remarkable. It had endured betrayal, abandonment, and the draining effects of the parasites. Yet it had emerged stronger and capable of forming a deep connection. Rylan felt a quiet pride in having played a role in this recovery. One night, as they rested together in the quiet of the ship, Lutri curled up near him, emitting a soft glow. Rylan reached out, gently brushing a hand along its fur. The creature leaned into the touch slightly, nuzzling him. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense meaning, a symbol of trust, gratitude, and the bond they had built. Rylan whispered softly, "You're safe now, always." Lutri responded with a gentle sound, eyes glowing faintly, and nudged closer. Rylan realized that this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter. Lutri was no longer the fragile, abandoned creature he had rescued. It was strong, confident, and ready to explore life with him. And he, in turn, had come to understand that life, no matter how small or vulnerable, deserved care, patience, and respect. Together, they had faced abandonment, danger, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger, connected, and ready for the future. In the days that followed, Rylan and Lutri continued to explore the ship together. They moved through corridors, examined tools, and even ventured outside for short observations in the safe areas around the drifting junk field. Lutri's movements were now agile and precise, its confidence evident in every leap and stretch. It responded to Rylan's voice and gestures with subtle signals of understanding. Rylan began to notice the depth of the creature's intelligence even more. Lutri seemed to anticipate his actions, watch for patterns, and respond in ways that suggested reasoning and memory. It was more than instinct. It was awareness, learning, and adaptation. Rylan realized that he had rescued not just a creature, but a life capable of complex thought and emotion. One evening, as they rested together, Lutri emitted a series of soft, musical sounds that seemed deliberate. Rylan observed closely, noticing patterns in the light pulses of its fur that corresponded to the sounds. He began to recognize that Lutri was attempting a form of communication. The realization was profound. This was no longer one-sided care. Lutri was responding, expressing, and engaging in dialogue in its own unique way. Rylan leaned closer, speaking softly and mirroring the sounds and light patterns. Lutri responded, adjusting its glow and emitting softer, melodic tones. A quiet understanding formed between them, a conversation without words, based on trust, observation, and shared experience. Rylan felt a deep connection, knowing that Lutri had chosen to engage, to trust, and to communicate after everything it had endured. The ship drifted silently through space, surrounded by debris and the distant light of stars. Inside, however, warmth and life thrived. Rylan and Lutri had formed a bond forged in adversity, patience, and care. Lutri had recovered fully, both physically and emotionally, and the quiet companionship between them had become a source of strength for both. As he watched Lutri curl up near him that night, Rylan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the abandoned junk field, the parasite-ridden body, and the weak, trembling creature, to the confident, intelligent, and trusting companion before him, the transformation was extraordinary. It was a story of survival, resilience, and the power of care. Rylan whispered softly, "We've come a long way, Lutri, and this is only the beginning." The creature responded with a gentle, musical sound, its soft glow pulsing rhythmically. They were no longer two separate beings, but a pair connected by trust, respect, and shared experience. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, explore the unknown, and continue the journey they had begun in the quiet corners of space. And as the ship drifted silently, carrying them toward the next adventure, Rylan knew one thing with certainty. Lutri was no longer alone, and he would never let it be.